I heard today one of the speeches that said that increasing, I think, was increasing the fuel efficiency by 50% in 8 years. Well, our product cycle is 5 years, and so keep this in mind when you start thinking about how big a job it is. And when we start talking about lighter weights and different vehicles, please understand also that we have new rules for pedestrian safety. They're going to dominate how the front end of the cars look and the structure of the cars, side impact safety, rollover, and all of these things dominate the weight and the overall design of the vehicle. And we have to have now start to design pedestrian crush zones into the front of the cars, and that takes space. So we'd like to make the cars smaller. I mean, I have a Smart at home that I'm playing around with, and I think it's great. We understand the need to make the cars smaller, but we're really challenged in some of these areas. Before I go on, I want to point out a couple of things here. That little car there is a single-person electric vehicle. We're in big discussions now internally how to bring the car into the urban society. Every day, 180,000 people across the world move into urban societies, okay? So our cities are getting huge. And do we continue to use the urban development to accommodate the car, or is there some kind of method that automobile makers can start working with urban designers to design the cars for emerging cities? And I'm involved with that with a lot of folks in the world, and it's an interesting situation. The other car we have here is a fuel cell vehicle. I agree with John. They're a ways away. Our stack designs are pretty good right now. Our cold weather performance is getting better. I think Honda with their new FCX showed you what a innovative car fuel cells can be. We're kind of stuck on storage right now, and how we're actually going to store the hydrogen on board. We're at 10,000 psi. It's a rather inelegant engineering solution. So I'm going to go on now. Unfortunately, you've seen this before, just the last presentation. We're a little bit more pessimistic than John. We do think that the other countries are coming up to near OECD levels in vehicle ownership. We think about 4.4 billion cars is what we're going to see, maybe a little bit less, maybe around 3 billion. But we think the environmental impacts, even assuming normal development of catalytic converters and things like that, the environmental impacts from this type of vehicle penetration are 4 to 5 times worse than what we have now. So we really have to really study CO2 and how we're going to eliminate carbon from the entire life cycle of the vehicle. It's a big deal. One thing that most people don't realize is keep your eye on the growth in the Middle East. Assuming that we don't go to war there, their population is inverse to ours. We're heavy on the top with a bunch of old geezers like me hanging around. But that's not the case in the Middle East and in Africa. And they're a bunch of young kids, and they're going to enter the marketplace, and they're going to enter the jobs, and maybe there'll be enough money there. And so we see in Latin America and in the Middle East strong vehicle growth. So we've really got a challenge on our hands. And as John pointed out, you've got to understand the scale. We're building in the United States 40,000 cars every day. Monday through Sunday. Just keep that in mind. And as John pointed out, we've got a $250 million on the road in the U.S. and $750 million worldwide. And those cars do tend to remain in use anywhere from 15 to 20 years, especially the bigger and the heavier, older vehicles. In the good tradition of bringing coal to Newcastle, I'm going to show you some oil slides. I don't think you need to say too much about peak oil. We're working with Dr. Peter Wells, who I think is a really brilliant engineer from Scotland. And when we talk about peak oil, forget the timelines, because to me, they're not important. What we're seeing is that the non-OPEC FSU production has already probably peaked right now. So geopolitically, we're shifting the responsibility for oil production to FSU, to Russia, and who knows what Putin's policies will be and what happens after he steps down, and into OPEC. So what we see is a series of rolling volatilities. Perhaps the volatility in the market we're seeing today is because of the non-OPEC, the peak in non-OPEC FSU. Certainly we'll see another crisis or another volatility when Russia peaks or the FSU peaks somewhere in the next 10 years or so. And then the call on OPEC to meet the demand. They need somewhere around $2 to $3 trillion upstream. Is there the political stability to encourage that kind of investment? I don't know. But we're certainly going into a new paradigm and also into conservation and new fuels and technologies. I know you've all heard this all week. This is predicted energy supply. This actually comes from Japan. It's a little bit, I think, optimistic. But you see renewables and biomass up here. I think that time frame's probably a little pessimistic. But when we study renewables and when we look at biomass and cellulosic is a big deal, it's the transportation of the biomass to market and the transportation of ethanol to market that you've really got to focus on. Simply, you're moving millions and millions of tons of biomass to make these fuels into areas that typically don't have the ability to move that. So you're either talking new railroads and right-of-ways, or you're talking trucking on a scale that's almost unimaginable. And the diesel emissions from moving this biomass are huge when you start doing the life cycle assessment. So this is not a panacea. Renewable fuels, biofuels, can play an important role, but we've got to look at water quality. We've got to start looking at. Everybody throws a number out. We've got 300 million acres in the U.S. that we can grow on, but that's not 300 million homogeneous acres. These are little tiny areas all over the U.S. And if you look at it in detail as we do, you'll see that a lot of these areas depend on the Ogallala Aquifer for water. The drawdown rate on that aquifer versus recharge is about 5 to 1. And we're facing a serious water quality problem, also with oil shale and coal to liquids. And so it's not just the CO2 or the energy in, the energy out. It's the water quality, the runoff. A typical ethanol plant has the same sewage signature as a typical Midwest city. All of those things have to be taken into consideration as we start to look at this. And CO2. These are the various charts from the IPCC of where we're going to stabilize. I'm frankly quite pessimistic that we're going to stabilize anywhere around 550 ppm. I think that there's money that we should also be spent to look at accommodation of the effects of climate change, and whether that means, for instance, our growing areas are shifting north. We might want to look at our land use policies in the coastal areas and areas like Boston and New York as well. Breakdown of CO2 emissions. Automobiles are about 20% or 17% now, I don't know. Power generation is about 39%. Again, I'm pessimistic that we're going to do much about that as we see people go to low price power. It looks like we want to have about 3.5 cents a kilowatt as a target. You're not going to do that with wind. You're not even going to come close with solar. And so we see an increasing move. You saw it in Texas with 11 power plants just permitted down there. They're basically coal-fired power plants. There's nothing advanced about them. No carbon capture, sequestration, none of that. Hopefully we can have that, but until we do, relying on the electric industry to pull us out of a problem is trading one issue for another, and it's not a solution right yet. So everybody wants the automobile industry to do something grand. Smaller cars, 50% fuel economy in 8 years. Well, who's going to buy the cars? We've got to balance the environmental reductions or the environmental impacts with consumer demand, okay? And there's 3 issues that we have to address here. One is we have to do the technology. Now, Toyota, Honda, and a bunch of companies, we're pretty smart, we're pretty bright boys at doing the technology. We can do that. The next thing we have to do is prepare society, because I guarantee if we go out on the street today, and we could try that and talk to people, they're not into this, they don't understand this. There's no societal preparation. So if I had the greatest car in the world today and put it on the market without the people knowing why they should buy that, they're not going to. The third thing we need is an energy policy in the United States, and in fact in the world, that sends the signal to consumers that this is the direction we're going to go. We're going to go down this road and we're not coming back. We've done that before in California with CNG, with methanol, and with electricity, with EVs, where lots of money have been invested, billions of dollars, it didn't work out, and left a lot of stranded investments. We can't do that to the consumers again, and there is no consumer out there right now that is in tune with all of you in here. When we talk about consumers and the cost of fuel, that's just what they mean, is the cost they pay for fuel. They don't really care about electricity or biofuels. What they do care about is what it costs them at the pump. And you can see that right now, fuel has gone down, and the sales of light trucks, of trucks and SUVs has increased. That's already started, and it's what fuel's been down a week and a half now. So, what can I say? Sheep are made to be shorn. I'm sorry, that's rude. Okay, so I think everybody here, if they tell you they've got a silver bullet, then I want to hire them immediately, because we don't have a silver bullet. We're playing with all of these. When I say playing, it's euphemistic for we're killing ourselves. CNG, there still may be a small market for CNG in fleets. Ethanol, especially cellulosic, I'm not a big fan of the corn-based direction we're headed right now because of land use and water issues. Biodiesel, well, biodiesel is a interesting situation. From oil palms, biodiesel is the #1 reason for deforestation of the rainforest in the Amazon and in Malaysia, as the rainforests are cleared to grow oil palm plantations. In fact, Ron said we're working in the Galapagos Islands on various projects there trying to develop sustainable energy systems for emerging countries, and I'm under huge pressure to put biodiesel into the Galapagos there, and the biodiesel comes from the rainforests in Ecuador that are being cut down and burned to grow oil plantations. So that's going on all the time. But across all of this is hybrid technology, because we can increase the efficiency of a powertrain pretty readily with a hybrid technology, whether it's a fuel cell or a diesel or a gasoline vehicle. And that's a definition of a hybrid, is 2 or more energy storage systems, both which provide propulsion power. That's an SAE definition. Target selection, as John said, most people want horsepower, they don't want fuel economy. Frankly, Toyota hasn't made a good inroad in providing hybrids as a top-of-engine grade strategy. We're trying that in the Lexus now to get more people to buy hybrids and to drive the cost down. But people want their horsepower. They're not so much interested in the new technology. We do have to mitigate our price. Everybody wonders what Toyota's hybrid price is. Well, y'all can go figure that out now, because just go model for model in the Camry hybrid versus the Camry LE, and equip the cars similarly, and you'll see it's $2,000. I'll save you the math. And it's about a 5-year payback. And increasing the volume will lower the premium. And we have some unique attributes that also offset the premium. A lot of people will be bringing hybrids to the markets. Not all hybrids are equal, especially the Toyota and Ford and Nissan use a battery-heavy approach that allows more flexibility, but it increases the cost. If you look at this, I'm not here to sell hybrids or Toyotas, but I will sell hybrids or Toyotas if you'd like, because I get a bonus. But what I'm showing you here is essentially in 4 or 5 years in one product cycle, we're able to increase the fuel economy and the performance by about 25%, okay? And we've also increased the size of the car and decreased the emissions down to where ATPs have now. That's a California means, advanced technology, partial zero emission vehicle, essentially non-detect under load our engines are. And that's in 5 years. So our next model cycle is 2008 for the Prius. You guys can do your own calculations and figure out what our target is for fuel economy. As I say, hybrids are core elements for us. Essentially, we use the same hybrid technology in our Prius that we use in our fuel cell. And in fact, we use some of the exact same components in both cars. enables this energy to move back and forth as we look at our electronic tuning and how our power electronics work. Okay, well-to-wheel. Everybody's talked well-to-wheel, and that means the energy from the well to the tank to the wheel. We've got a little different measure. Right now, well-to-wheel is about driving the car. It's refining the fuel and the fuel consumption. We use life cycle assessment where we look at the carbon, or it could be NOx or whatever, from materials production to vehicle production, driving, maintenance, and finally disposal. And there's a lot that we can learn from that, and it's embodied in every Toyota that's made. In fact, each chief engineer that works on a car has a carbon budget, just like they have a cash budget, and they can't exceed their carbon budget. So that's driving how we design our cars and what materials we use to put into them. Okay, so life cycle assessment, our inputs are natural resources and energy, and then our outputs are vehicle emissions, greenhouse gases, wastewater, waste solids, air pollution. I'll give you two examples. This is from materials production. You can see the big ones, the big stuff are the catalysts that we're using. And ruthenium especially is a very big problem for us. And Amory Lovins likes to beat me up all the time because he says our cars are too heavy and we should be using carbon fiber. And I keep talking to Amory about the life cycle of carbon fiber from the autoclave part. And as you can see, the CO2 that's generated during the processing of carbon fiber is never recovered in the in use of the car. And also carbon fiber is not recyclable. So, that's the kind of stuff you learn when you start doing these exercises. And then another LCA, this is during production. You can see that actually working with metal, hammering out metal and welding it is much lower in carbon than molding plastics. So that's how we do it to get a complete picture of where we're headed. Of course, what's next? Fuel cells some ways away, 10, 15, 20 years. Maybe longer than that. Plug-in hybrids nearer. There's many different of plug-in hybrid, and Andy Frank's going to talk about those. So just basically, this is a continuum from 0 all the way up to 100% electric, and where we might use, there's a little typo there, where we might use a fuel cell as a range extender for a pure EV. And there's a lot of considerations we're looking at. The goal is that energy security is environmental benefit, CO2, criteria pollutants, which way you want to balance the cars for that direction. And what are the basic assumptions? Are we going to use a blended electric range versus a switch that lets you go into EV? How many EV miles do we design for? What's the size or type of the battery? Right now we're having problems with lithium-ion batteries from a recycling point of view, and from a survivability with wide charge swings. What is a driving cycle? Plug-ins tend to be really optimized for urban cycles, but they're not so hot out on the freeway, where you're basically taking that extra weight and you're just dragging it along with you. And then what type of fuel for electrical generation? Again, we're somewhat pessimistic about the direction that the world electricity is going. And keep in mind what John said. These plug-ins are not something that we're going to do for a few people here in Boston or for all of you guys. We've got to have millions and millions and millions of cars on the road. So we've got to have something that works for millions and millions and millions and millions of people, and something that millions and millions and millions of people are going to buy. And that's a long, hard road. And rules of thumb, I'm going to hurry up quickly here. Carbon and CO2. With our current average grid mix, we think that plug-in hybrids reduce CO2. If the percentage of coal increases, we think that plug-in hybrids will increase CO2, but that's our own calculations. I think that Argonne National Lab is a little bit different. Current grid mix with criteria pollutants. Right now that plug-in hybrids might increase NOx, but if we have renewables, that will be taken care of. Battery charging, as I told you, and nickel metal hydrides and lithium ions, but Andy will go into much more detail with that. And then this is something that from Toyota you can see the packaging space for the first hybrid, and then our battery got smaller. This is what we're looking at our current Prius body as a plug-in. Okay, thank you very much.